So, welcome everyone. I'm just delighted that you have joined us today. This is the third webinar in a series called On the Right Track, the Transformative Potential of Rail. Today's webinar is The German Case, Rail Stations to Connect the World. My name is Dr. Hillary Nixon, and I am the Deputy Executive Director of the Moneta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. MTI is the University Transportation Center that leads 3 competitively selected multi-university consortia that focuses on improving the mobility of people and goods. MTI's mission is to increase mobility for all by improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of our nation's transportation system. We accomplish this through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development. In today's webinar, we continue to explore 50 years of global high-speed rail innovation. Today, we move into Germany, where we learn how the country's world-class multimodal transportation hubs enable seamless global mobility. Before we begin, we want to thank our co-sponsors. Thank you to the APTA High Speed and Intercity Passenger Rail Committee, California High Speed Rail Authority, and the High Speed Rail Alliance for supporting this series and empowering us all to learn more about the benefits of rail. Let me take a moment to introduce our moderator for today, Eric Eidlin. As the City of San Jose Station Planning Manager, he plays a leading role in the city's efforts to transform Diridon Station into a world-class multimodal hub. As a fellow of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, Eric published a widely cited report on high-speed rail station planning in France and Germany that drew lessons for California. He holds a graduate degree in urban design from the University of Toronto, a master's degree in city planning from the University of California, Los Angeles, and studied urban sociology at Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany as a Fulbright scholar. Eric, turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Hillary, for the introduction. Yeah, I'm really excited for today's webinar. Really excited to welcome Tobias here. He's actually right beside me, and we're in the same room in downtown San Jose. I personally have long admired the work of GMP. They are known for a wide range of, they have a broad portfolio, including transportation projects, airports, train stations, as well as sports stadia and other facilities. I'll let Tobias talk more about that, but first let me introduce him. Tobias is an associate partner in GMP's Berlin office. After studying architecture at the Technical University in Braunschweig and becoming a registered architect, he stayed at GMP in Berlin. He started at GMP in Berlin in 2004. In 2009, he transferred to their Beijing office and returned to Berlin 7 years later. A true global citizen, he has successfully managed several large-scale projects from conception to delivery and is currently overseeing efforts across Europe, Asia, and Africa. This reach enables Tobias to swiftly grasp the complexity of his clients' cultures and challenges, empowering innovative solution strategies that adhere to the highest design standards. Tobias's work focuses on interdisciplinary collaboration towards sustainable projects. In 2020, he was part of the Industry Advisor Group at Harvard University, their graduate school of design, on the topic of the future of air travel. Please join me in welcoming Tobias.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the kind words. Thanks for having me. And let's step right in and start sharing. Okay, let's move ahead. Rail stations to connect the world, or just anyone who's passing through. But as Eric said, maybe a few words on GMP to start with. I am fully aware that GMP usually means guaranteed maximum price in this North American sphere, and we're here to change this. So transportation is a key element of the firm's DNA. The very first project of Meinhard von Gerkan and Volkbein Marg, as they came from university, was Berlin-Tegel Airport, an airport that revolutionized the system of airports. As you drive into the center, leave the car, and then just walk through the width of the building to board your plane. Back then, of course, there was no security checks and no other things that would stop you in between. This airport was running up until this one opened. This is the new airport in Berlin. It's one of around 550 projects that our firm has completed up to date. We'll see more on this one later. GMP has around 500 employees throughout our offices in the world. It's a very diverse company due to the very different regions that we work in. We love to include everybody to join. So mainly offices in Europe, Germany, in Hamburg, Berlin, and Aachen, but also strong offices in Asia, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, as well as in Vietnam and Hanoi. But we are usually opening field offices wherever it takes us. The picture in the background is Cape Town, where we have been strongly involved in the FIFA World Cup. As usually when FIFA travels, we're happy to have a few of our stadia also included in the World Cups, Euro Cups, and other major tournaments of FIFA. Yeah, as Eric mentioned, we work across basically all disciplines. I tend to say that we work from urban design to doorknobs. So really it's every scale, any kind of context. Yeah, and another thing that we have developed a strong capability in is dealing with adaptive reuse. Umbau, the German word of transformation, is the topic of a show that we had in the biennial in 2023 in Venice, where we showcased a few of our around 65 projects that have dealt with existing contexts. And this very successful show has been traveling and has also been on show in New York in October of last year. And this was the point when we also made the decision to open up an office in the city of New York within this year. But let's focus at transportation. This is the topic for today. And I would like to rewind a little bit because I think the history of transportation, of course, is very, very different. In Europe, it has always been implanted within our major cities, and even smaller cities usually had a very strong connection to rail and public transportation. Similar to here, the train station areas became sort of the shabby areas of town in the late 90s, early 90s. And this was part of a study that we did with the Deutsche Bahn, the German rail system, that was also showcased in Venice for the biennial, on how to upgrade these stations, on how to revive these cathedrals of travel that they used to be when they first opened and first were built in very elegant engineering structures. So this was strong research that was done and sort of the spark that then brought the revitalization of the German rail. GMP had done a number of master plans on how to deal with stub end. This is a vocabulary that I learned the other day, dead end stations, by creating tunnels that go across the city so that the trains can continue. You don't lose the time of them diverting back out of the city and then taking the turns. At the same time, these tunnels would then bring back a whole bunch of area to the cities that can be developed as urban developments above ground. Stuttgart is one of these master plans that is currently being put into reality. Stuttgart 21 is a project that is currently under construction, not by GMP, but still very much based on our master plan ideas. We also did master plans for Munich and Frankfurt. These two cities did not decide to build the tunnel, so they are still operating with their stub end stations. Also part of this exhibition of the renaissance of railway stations was the so-called Typendach. It's a modular system that can be applied to any platform throughout Germany and probably also internationally. It has been developed mainly because after the reunification of Germany, there were so many stations, especially in the East, that had to be modernized, yet it was just too much to come up with individual designs for each and every one. So this very simple typology of a roof can be slightly adjusted in length, but also in width to match any station. And you see that it's in practice since 1996 up to 2025. Just in January, we have opened the last one, the most recent one in Hamburg, of course, updated with modern LED and all other modern facilities. Another thing that we did in these in the 90s about this revitalization of German rail was an interior for the so-called metropolitan train. The aim was to make the German rail attractive again for those that would usually, just out of status, would like to fly. So the task was to create a first-class train interior that would be just as comfortable as any airport lounge and allow people to work as they were on the train. So this study actually introduced these tables that you might know or might not know from some of the trains that you have been riding, but also the fold-down tray table where you can place, back then it was mainly books and papers, nowadays it's the laptop. So this became somewhat of a standard, not in this high-quality furnishing, but sort of as a configuration of seats and tables in trains. This is one of our most recent train stations in Germany. It's actually a train station and a city train station. You see that we're connecting two different lines. One is the Federal Rail and the other one is the Hamburg City Rail. We managed to at least get them to agree on a unified design and a connection with this tunnel. But for everything else, we were dealing with two completely different entities. This is probably something that is also very much common in the US. So this is the inside of one of these stations. Actually, this is the status quo where it's still a dead end, but the bridge over the river, the extension has just been commissioned, and GMP is to design the bridge as well as the next station to come. This picture shows our approach of a very clear structural order. We love to work with good structure engineers, and we're proud when you don't really see the difference between design and engineering anymore. So in this case, I think this worked very, very nicely. You don't know where the design starts or whether it's just all structure engineering. And yeah, of course, one of our most prominent, of our biggest stations is the Berlin Central Station. Eric is using it as his background. And of course, I'll go into details on this one. But in order to understand the conditions under which this station and this very particular system of a cross station came to be, we have to rewind a bit in history again. So this is the exact same site. You see the river in the front. You also see this hammer-shaped harbor space in the background here. So there used to be the so-called Lehrter Bahnhof, the Lehrter train station, which also was a dead-end station, as many of the main stations in Europe in the early years of development were. But also in the back, you see this viaduct that is crossing the harbor bay and is crossing behind the train station. This was built around 10 years after the train station was first inaugurated and first put into practice, with the long-distance trains coming from the west of Germany to head into this station. Back then, they managed to at least build one staircase to connect a stop for the commuter train to the long-distance trains, and maybe this was the very first east, west, north, south connecting train station in the world. In this graphic, you see an old map of 1920s of Berlin, which quite nicely shows how all the long-distance trains just come in from the outside and then they stop at the major train stations that are not connected in between. Berlin then always had this city link as a commuter train, and also the ring on the outside, connecting all these things on the outside. But all this was just commuter train level, so no long distance connections that would go across. You would always just come in from the sides and then have to find your way into the other areas of the city. Then, of course, Berlin is very, very special. During the separation of East and West Germany, everybody probably knows there has been the Berlin Wall. And while to the west side of the wall, the parts directly to the walls were used, but of course, in some areas were always the end of the free world. So usually not used for the most precious functions. This picture is showing the Brandenburg Gate looking from the east, and you see how the East German side was cleared out for security reasons. They had mines and everything that we know about the wall in this part, and of course, nobody was allowed to enter this dead man's land. This, of course, during the separation, was a very, very strong limitation to the development of West Berlin, as it was an island within everything. Yet, as the wall came down, there was the political will, as well as the financing and this sort of fresh restart in people's minds that allowed to push great projects. One of those was that Berlin decided to finally build one main train station. Before, there were several little train stations all around, coming in from different distances. So the idea was to create the site of the former Lehrter Bahnhof, which was destroyed during the war, into the new main train station. And in order to get a better connection, to build a tunnel going north-south through Berlin. So this would really go through most of the areas of the city down below ground. At the same time, we had the connection east and west, and this was then upgraded from the commuter trains to long-distance trains, high-speed rail, but of course they're not going high-speed in the city center. This is called the Pilz concept, a German word for the mushroom concept, because the new tracks sort of formed this mushroom-like shape. Again, a view back, 1928. This is the location of the now main train station. You see the Lehrter Bahnhof here in this position, and you see the viaduct crossing across the Humboldt-Hafen. This is the period of the wall. You see how the west side of the wall is just used as mainly cargo facilities for the rail. And of course, the east is just blocked off. The commuter train actually was allowed to pass through. It would go to one more station, to Friedrichstraße, which was heavily secured, but would allow the exchange on rail between East Germany and West Germany if you had the right papers to make it across this checkpoint. And this is today, or almost today. This is 2024. You see how the rails have been reconfigured. They're going underground to go through the station, and this is also giving away the direction of these main buildings across the station. These are the tunnels that are going to -4 level. They have to be quite deep in order to go through the river at this position. And then the viaduct was slightly derouted and widened to go across the train station in east-west direction. So again, an animation of the tunnels in blue and the elevated trains also crossing the river of the Harbor Bay on the upper areas. So today, this is Europe's largest station in terms of square meters. It has 300,000 passengers per day, 6 above ground tracks and 8 below ground tracks, as well as a very, very big retail structure within. This little diagram is more or less showing you that there's a free flow. This is getting more important when we look at the Chinese stations later. So basically in Germany, you're allowed to go anywhere at any time. You don't need a ticket to go onto the platform, which on the one hand makes things very easy. On the other hand, creates a certain chaos at times. This three-dimensional section is showing you the different components. You see the tunnels underneath, as well as the trains passing above. In between are a number of levels to connect and make the transition in a vertical way, to allow the exchange between below and above, and also the ground level. There's a small component of parking, 830 cars on 3 levels. Parking is not a main topic in European stations. This road tunnel, the federal roadway of B96 was also part of this project. It was built in the process of the main train station, and there's also, actually it's not showing in this picture, there's also a connection to the subway of the city of Berlin. So a very, very complex structure, which at the same time creates a beautiful interior that is showcasing everything on every level in a visual way. So the design concept was to have a maximum of transparency in the roof and create all these void spaces to allow the daylight to filter through to the lowest level of the station, so that you don't have the feeling of sitting in a basement while waiting on your trains on -4 level. But everything is visual in between, and you always have the visuals to help you with orientation as well. Again, a section and the different levels of the train station, and a very free flow in between these areas. So again, orientation, of course, is supported by signage, but in this case, you more or less see where you need to go. You see exactly that there are trains running upstairs, and you see that there are trains running below. And through the main glass facades, you also see whether you're heading south or north, because in the south, you would see the government buildings. This is a small video that is showing you, or trying to show you, the vertical space, maybe much better than any picture can show. And as you're standing there, you have the whole station in a view. So there's always entertainment while you wait, because you see so many things going on at the same time, that there's a German expression, it's a Wimmelbuch, which means that it's a picture where there's so many stories happening that you don't need text. You just look at the picture and you see and read all these stories. You also see these 2 floors of commercial. They're integrated there as more or less like a small shopping mall. These are the trains that are running underneath, and whenever you're standing as here on the lower levels, you still see the glass roof and the daylight filtering through. This, of course, also helps with orientation, because you always have the orientation towards the light. And through these main facades, where these 2 girls are heading to on the escalator with us, you then have the view either to the south, where you see the government buildings as a very striking image of Berlin, or to the north, where there's the new development of Europe City. Let me get to the next page. So maybe slightly philosophical, what makes this train station so special? Of course, it's a place where you change trains, but in this case, it's not an interchange. You don't stay within your capsule and just go into a different lane as you would do with the car, but it is an exchange, because you're out in a physical reality. You have the chance to exchange with people. You have the chance to do some shopping, to do exchange of goods, but also you get a little bit of input from the space that you're in. Berlin, as a city where shops are closed on Sunday, is also a part where this train station, as well as other transportation areas where shops are also open on Sunday due to the catering to transportation, is highly attractive for people that want to do shopping on Sundays. They forgot to buy their groceries, they would go to train stations. But on the other hand, it's always a place where people connect. So very much like medieval towns, when the trading routes that would come into the town would more or less naturally always connect to the marketplace, and then goods were exchanged and people would continue their journey. So it's a natural crossover that offers many chances. To further underline this, the Berlin Hauptbahnhof generates a few pop-up events. One of this is the Arrival Festival by the Berlin Philharmonics. They test new modern music in the environment of the train stations. You have all the announcements as you have in train stations. You have the trains coming and leaving. So, and all this is meshed into this music arrangement. And of course is highly attractive and open to the public. During the Soccer World Cup, there was big fan shops down there, And there's constantly something happening on the central stage that is just formed by the many ways that are crossing through this train station as a big exchange platform, but also as an experience space. And in the background, you see these two levels of shops that are always open. Of course, it is an image to the city. It is Berlin's train station. It is the city's train station in one of the biggest cities in Europe. The German train system, the DB, Deutsche Bahn, they have set up their headquarter offices in these two office wings that are going across the train station. And just as you don't see the major engineering that went into crossing the river underneath in tunnels, you also don't see the major engineering that went into these high-rise structures above. As these trains had to be opened all the time, so the whole structure was built during operation of the trains on the higher level, we had to build these bridges as standing towers at first, and then there was one weekend where they allowed us to close the tracks and lower these two structures in place. And then once this bridge was closed, as you see on the left-hand side, the interior fit out and everything else could happen above the rails while the trains were running underneath. So from Germany, I would like to take you to China, because this is also a very interesting nation for trains. And this is strongly due to the strong development, the strong push for high-speed rail in the past 17, 20 years of China. So the map shows you the development of Chinese rail in 2008, mainly high-speed rail. So you see that there was not much, just the highly strong developed corridors on the East Coast were partly connected or connecting cities with high-speed rail. This is 2023, so maybe a different mushroom concept. This is the mycelia underneath that is just growing everywhere. So this is a very, very strongly developed high-speed rail network by now. And GMP was lucky enough to build 4 stations as of today. And there is a development also within these stations. So this is sort of the projection of GMP stations as of Berlin Central Station. There have been a few before, but this probably kicked it off quite well. And you see that most of these stations have been built in China in the recent years. To understand the size of a Chinese railway station, you have to understand that they're all designed for peak time capacity. There's 2 major migration periods in the year. One is Spring Festival, when everybody is off for holidays, and one is the national holidays in October. And this is the peak where every station is designed for. So Tianjin, as one of the very first Chinese railway stations for high speed, completed in 2011, has only around 40,000 passengers per day, but that's an average, so there's always the peak. What makes Chinese train stations special is that there's a very clear order on how the passenger flow is organized. Tianjin was one of the first generation stations that was sort of put into place in order to start up new areas of a city. So the railway station would be a very first, and then the city would grow around it. In this case, we have the South Plaza, and in the north to the river, there's the North Plaza. Underneath the North Plaza is the bus terminal, so that's the ground transportation connection. In the south, the city will come towards. And then the station itself is conceived as a bridge across. Within these arcades, you have a public passage that is connecting north and south. But everything else is then on the inside, and you always have these security checks. So you need to have a ticket, you need to be security cleared in order to go into the core of the station. And what's very particular about Chinese rail is the organized people flow. So you would be waiting in your waiting hall. Once the train is there, the gates open, you show your ticket, and then you go onto the platform to board the plane. So not the plane, the train. On the other hand, for those people arriving, they always go downstairs. They go downstairs into the arrival hall, where they have to show their ticket again to prove that they have paid up to the station. And then they go back out to the city level. So arriving and departing passengers never meet. This is the waiting hall in Tianjin. You see the big glass roof, and then you also see the gates that will only open once the train is accessible. Then you go on to the tracks. The track roofs are always fully covered. Another very particular thing about Chinese railway stations is that all columns always stand in between the tracks, so you never have columns on the platform. This is different to Europe, where we usually put the columns on the platform to have the flexibility for the train later on. And this is the arrival tunnel. So when you come down, you go through this tunnel, and then you exit the station from there. By now, the city has almost grown to the station. So this was the case where the city is the catalyst for development around. So the station is the catalyst for the development around. This one is different. This is one of the latest train stations we did in China. This is Fengtai in Beijing, which was replacing an old station within a dense urban environment. This has around 200,000 passengers a day, again designed for peak time. We have 20 ground level tracks. Some of those were existing before, they were extended, but the full capacity was not possible to all have on the ground floor. So the decision was made to put the new high-speed rail on elevated tracks above. So we have 12 high-speed rails that are running on the upper level. The arrival and departure process is still very much the same as it is in Tianjin, just that we have two levels. So from the waiting hall, you either go up to the high-speed rail or you go down to the regular rail. But if you arrive with high-speed rail, you still need to go down into the very basement, into this arrival tunnel, to have the same process. This is a cross section. You see this very, very large station and the many different components of the station. There's also two subway lines that are to be integrated. There's a little bit of parking. But what makes it different to Tianjin, for example, is that there is a first element of public space, again, within the transportation building that you can access without having a ticket. This is sort of the new development that we notice in Chinese stations, that they're swinging back a little bit towards this more public access. This is the schematic section, again, explaining this different way of coming into the waiting space and then either going up or going down. And as you arrive, you always go down into this basement tunnel to follow the usual passenger flow of any Chinese station. So this is then this first entrance hall where you have a few amenities, and then eventually you go through these checks where you need to have a ticket to go in. These escalators bring you up into to the waiting floor. This is on this level. Again, we try to bring in as much as possible daylight into all areas. So to the left here, you see the elevated tracks. This is the platform for the elevated tracks. Of course, they get very good daylight, but with these big channels, we also bring the daylight down to the very basement. Eric had mentioned that GMP was part of the future of air travel at the GSD in Harvard, and was basically our input into this discussion on the future was that the future of air travel should be connected as strongly as possible to high-speed rail in order to avoid short-distance flights that are just not sustainable, but they're also time-wise not sustainable, because you're much faster if you have a good high-speed rail connection directly to airports. So I showed you Tegel as the first key of our office. Ever since, we have done a number of airports, and Frankfurt and Berlin already have a rail integrated directly to the airport system. In Frankfurt, this came later as an addition. In BER, Berlin New Airport, as a greenfield airport, we were able to integrate this rail from the beginning right below the terminal. So this is BER as seen from the airfield. It's a straightforward capital airport, 33 million passengers per year. And it's still an airport that has decent distance to the gate with only 400 meter, which is much, much less than, for example, Frankfurt or other major international airports. Again, a short movie which just shows the approach. This is the usual roadways leading up to the airport. But on the right-hand side, you see that there is the rail also coming, and it's going right into the tunnels underneath. So either you drive up with the car and then get to the usual drop-off zones, or you arrive by train and go directly below into the station. This is the airport station. From here, you take the stairs up into the main hall. So down here is the arrival level. One more stair down is then the train station. So it's a very, very short, again, vertical connection with not much distance to walk. When I came to California this time, I left my house, walked 10 minutes to the train station, took 15 minutes of the train connecting directly into the station underneath. And then, as I know this airport very well, it takes me about half an hour, and then I'm at the gate, including security checks and everything else. So this is the convenience of a good public connection. This is the big space with the check-in counters. Another side note is that we have just been commissioned to reconfigure all this, as these classic check-in counters are no longer the main modus operandi for air check-in. Usually people just get their boarding passes on the cell phone already, and you just need bag drops. At the same time, the security systems advanced, and to facilitate these new machines where you don't need to take out your liquids or electronic devices anymore, they need a little bit of more space. So this big flexible hall is going to be reconfigured to make space for new security demands, which will help to increase the passenger flow, but again, reduce space that was previously used for classic check-ins. Yeah, and then you're off into the air and fly into the world wherever it takes you. It takes us and me quite often to China again. This is maybe a look into the future. This is in Shenzhen, the Shenzhen hub. First parts of this hub are in operation, but actually you don't see anything of it because everything is underground. So looking back at these 21 master plans where we did studies for towns in Germany that could do this, the Chinese are building their train stations completely underground already. The only thing that you see is this big roof that indicates an entrance. There's an airport check-in directly in this downtown station. So when you get there and you actually need to go to the airport with the express train from there, you can already get your boarding pass. You can check your luggage at this station and then maybe spend some time downtown rather than waiting too long at the airport, because then you only need to get through to security again at the airport, but all the rest of the check-in has been done already. And of course, the vast development above is then key of refinancing the big efforts that it takes to build these stations underground. So there you see that the tracks are way down. You still have the same system of waiting hall. The departure hall in this case has not been done further down, but it's going up. So this is also slightly changing this usual movement of passenger flow in Chinese stations. But in general, you see that it's so much tied into the urban fabric that it's not even visible above ground, except these few iconic roofs that then tell you that there is something more to see underneath. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I'm very much looking forward to questions. And this, by the way, is the view from our Hamburg office, looking at yet a different way of transporting goods and people, the waterways, but maybe this is a different opportunity at a different time.
Thank you very much, Tobias. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. there are lots of questions from the audience I see here. I might actually want to start. Your presentation touches on the multiple and very different roles of train stations in cities, right? Let me just read a quick anecdote that someone in the audience shared about 2015, which was the height of the migrant crisis in Europe, and in Germany accommodated the greatest number of refugees. So Christoph here writes, as someone living in Berlin, I can understand, or I can underscore this notion of exchange. The slide you showed earlier comparing the freeway interchange to the train hub. For example, a few years ago, when refugees from Ukraine came to Berlin, the main station was transformed easily into a sort of welcome center for the arrivals by many volunteers. Great example of the flexibility of this place. I think it also speaks to an important principle. Speaking to the value of rail generally for cities, right? It's that it takes so much less place to accommodate, like those photos you had of the Chinese New Year. Imagine if each of those people were one individual sitting in cars. I mean, it just wouldn't work, right? So I think that's a really important one. So anyway, I see some questions here. We've talked about the different roles of stations. I guess a question here is, when you think about a big hub, like whether it's Shenzhen or Berlin main station, how do you approach the integration of the transportation? Make sure you have seamless connectivity for passengers, but also hopefully achieve some of these other goals about, the station should be, so many of the photos you showed, the Berlin Philharmonic in at the Berlin main station. How do you accommodate all of these various functions, and in what order? Maybe it's because it's hard, right? There's only so much space.
Yeah.
So how do you prioritize? How do you what's the sequence?
Well, with major transportation buildings, usually you always have the main routes set almost before we come. So we don't discuss the landing strips and the airfield as much, or the routes of the trains. They're predefined by the radiuses a train can take. So you more or less get these as a fixed point. And then the architect's job starts with making the smartest connection between this. In the best case, you can go as vertical as possible, because vertical travel seems to be faster than horizontal travel. And also, if you have a visual connection between, gives you much better orientation, because you already see where you are heading. Right. Whereas if you have to run a mile straight, you never know how long this mile really is. So daylight is another huge component. As soon as you have daylight in stations, it also helps with orientation. It also helps with atmosphere a lot, and the feeling of security. If you don't run through dark tunnels all the time, but you're always in the daylit space during daytime, and at nighttime, then again, of course, artificial lighting is extremely important. And then comes that little spice that you're asking for, the little bit of a swing space. So if you do everything right, and just right, it's not going to be special. You need to have a little bit of extra, a little note that makes this space special. And this either is by combining the ways that people go, as it is in Berlin, that you suddenly have so many ways ending up into one platform, that this platform can become a stage. Of course, to argue for this, you can always say that this is the big exchange platform and you need people to run through it. But maybe there's just a little bit more space that you squeeze in there so that it can be a flexible space, even in peak times, as the Europe soccer teams are there, and we have thousands of people and fans running through the station at all times. But still, there's the chance to do something, and I think that's the way we approach things, we always look for this little bit of extra that might not be in the brief, but gives you the chance of creating a very special space later on.
Thank you. I guess maybe a related question, thinking about the uses of stations that aren't specifically transportation related. I mean, in some ways, I think it's obvious, right? It's easier to do these things, you know, to have the entrance hall that serves as a concert venue, maybe have more retail, maybe not. In a context like Germany, where you don't have as strict passenger control as in China. Would you say that's the case, or how in China do you approach the question differently, making sure that the station is still a great destination? It is really integrated with the city, in spite of, you know, somewhat strict security requirements that you have to design for.
This comes back to this evolution of stations in China that I was noting at.
Yeah.
Where the early stations, they were very much placed somewhere, and then they were the incubators for the city to grow close or away from the station and connect with the city. Many of the Chinese cities have an issue with over density. So they hope to put out satellites to sort of pull the density away from the city centers. And that was very much the case of these early stations. Then to the opposite, Fengtai brought the high-speed rail transportation where most of the people were already in a very dense urban setting of Beijing. So there, the challenge was different. There was almost no space, but we needed this huge hub to fit into an existing city fabric. And that's again how, even before we came, the engineers had this idea of elevating the high-speed tracks that were to be introduced newly into this overall system, creating this very special system of a station that then was brought as a task to the architects. And the same appears in the evolution of public access to these stations. In the first years, stations were just stations, and once you have a ticket, you're in. And then all the supporting businesses would cater to the passengers and the passengers only. Now more and more we are introducing something that we call the urban living room into these stations, where at least parts of the entrance hall are open to anyone at any time. And then these things also become more destinations as attractive places with restaurants and commercial options for people that do not necessarily need to take trains, but come there because the train station, again, is this exchange of flows and just a natural way where people meet.
And is that, were you instrumental, GMP, or, you know, you and maybe other international design firms, were you instrumental in convincing the Chinese authorities that this is something, that an approach they should take, or is it something they realized on their own, or how did that discussion play out?
I think maybe that's too much to put on our shoulders, but I'm sure that the many discussions that we had with Chinese rail authorities sort of opened doors. Or sparked interest in this concept. And of course, we have been touring many of the European stations with them. And as I mentioned earlier to you, the Chinese are very, very smart in studying best practice internationally and then see what is possible to adapt into their systems. And as in any major station, at least in Europe, this commercial component, or the component of non-traffic related spaces is a major topic. I think this, maybe more than GMP or other Western architects, is probably inspired to test this to a certain demand into the newer Chinese stations.
Right.
The fear is always that during these peak times, if you then bring in also other people that are interested in this traffic building, right, everything will collapse, because those guys you can't control. Anyone that has a ticket, you know exactly who's coming, how many are coming, at what time. But if you now bring in a free flow of people that just want to enjoy the space, that's the collapse, and that's what the Chinese definitely want to avoid.
Right, especially since, as you showed, their travel is very peaked.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Before we leave the topic of security, there is a question here from the audience about here in the U.S., federal officials have raised security concerns regarding placing rail terminals directly below airports or airport terminals. Is this an issue you have dealt with, and how?
Well, yes, we have dealt with it in Berlin. It is directly below the airport. I don't see where the security issue would be. I mean, the train is not most likely not going to derail exactly in that station. The failure of train systems is very, very low.
Yeah,
if someone wants to bring a bomb, they can also park the bomb in a car next to the airport or underneath the airport, or bring it into their luggage just before security, and they would be much, much more vulnerable areas than having a train underneath. Not to bring up any stupid ideas for people out there.
Right, or the loading docks for the restaurants, or those are also.
I mean, there's many very good ways to tamper with an airport aside a railway station underneath.
All right. Well, thank you.
I feel like I'm giving bad ideas to people.
Yeah, I don't know. So there are a few different questions here about development around the stations, thoughts about housing. To what degree is housing incorporated into some of the stationary plans you've worked on? Maybe you can talk a bit about Berlin Main Station, right? There was a pretty big master plan for the area surrounding it. It's right beside the federal government district, so that obviously, put some wind in the sails of the development that's encouraged. But we know, right, that the development there took longer to materialize than some had hoped. Can you speak a little bit to, and if you have some graphics, that would be great. Yeah,
I'll pull up this master plan again.
And we have to be we're getting short on time, so maybe just one more question after this one. Yeah,
let me quickly share. So what you're hinting at is this. Let me get this full screen. It's this part of town that's called Europe City, that was basically made available as all the tracks disappeared and went below ground. Housing directly integrated into a station is problematic due to noise. At least in Germany, we have very, very high standards of noise protection for residential areas. So this is fully okay. Also, these things that are facing directly the rails, they all have major noise protection surfaces, and you see how this thing running parallel to the tracks, these are all office buildings. So offices have less of a noise constraint in Germany than residential. So tying residential directly into a rail system is very, very complicated in Germany, at least. And in China, it's also not a topic because they always want the south facing. So it's never had it. Offices are easy to be integrated, as we have in Berlin and other stations.
Right, and the point that many of us who've worked on transit-oriented development projects is that office is denser than residential. So typically, it's if in common economic terms, it's a higher and better use. That said, you don't want these station areas that are ghost towns, right? During that phase. So it is important to have, whether it's hotel or residential. Those are really important. So you talked, maybe one last question. Sorry, we did not get to all of them, but you talked a bit about the unique political, historical situation in Berlin that allowed for the creation of this, really well-designed multimodal hub right in the heart of the city, right? It was formerly on the edges of West Berlin and East Berlin because of the wall, and now in this newly reunified city, it occupied this strategic central location. So that, you don't have that situation everywhere in the world. But what as a last question for you, do you see any, as we think in California and the U.S. about what kinds of moments in history or windows of opportunity we might see in the future? What advice can you give us as to being ready for those, or maybe you have even some predictions about what they could be? I don't know.
Also a discussion that we touched the other day. Of course, COVID could have been one of those, but COVID was a point in time when we all didn't want to join spaces of exchange with others. We were trying to isolate, and exchange was not a big thing. So I doubt that COVID is the spark that it needs for public transportation. One topic that could be is the realization that we are on a path of over-carbonizing our planet. And public rail, of course, is key of bringing down CO2 consumption by individual traffics. The problem with this is that it's not the one night when the wall came down. It's not the one night when the planet ignites. It's a slow fire that just keeps burning and is almost unstoppable if we don't do it now. But it's nothing that you suddenly see and feel. So it's not as shocking as the German wall coming down was in a positive way. So it's very difficult to leverage on this. But if there's an extremely good reason to do it now, it's exactly this, that we have to act, and we have to reduce short distance plane rides. We have to reduce single traffic in diesel or fossil fuel cars. And we have to densify every development that we have in order not to occupy more of the nature that would help us compensate for the CO2. But again, sadly, it's not this one moment in time where you say now. Well, now has been yesterday, right, and the day before yesterday.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, in the current, political environment, one might say that, these concerns are being deprioritized. Perhaps, I guess the other thing to remember, right, when we're talking about these big mega projects, is that they do take a very long time to implement. And so it's always a good time to plan for the future and to keep the long view as well.
Yes. Yeah. And you have to do all these major investments before they start paying off in a period when the administration might have changed, so someone else gets the glories. And that's a huge topic of Western good democracies.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much for this excellent presentation discussion, Tobias. If you enjoyed today's session, be sure to mark your calendar for the last webinar in the series on March 5th. In this last session, Heidi Sokolowski of Urban Field Studio, who's with us today, and I will summarize some of the key points made by our guest speakers during the webinar series and seek to draw lessons for us in the US and North America. More details, including the registration link, will be available soon. With that, thank you very much, and hope you all have a great remainder of your day.
Thank you.